Hello, friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Before we take you to your favorite Sports History Network show, just want to tell you a little bit about some merch that you can pick up that represents your favorite SHN podcast. So far, there's t-shirts, coffee mugs, and even books from some of the authors that do podcasts right here on SHN. Who could buy something better than that, than have the history right from the gentleman that you hear talking about it? But we also are adding things each and every day. And where's that store, may you ask? Well, it's at SportsHistoryNetwork.com. Up at the top, there is the SHN merch button. Click on that. It'll take you right to the store, and you can be representing your favorite podcast and show the world that, hey, on the swag that I'm using, it's the headquarters of sports yesteryear, Sports History Network, and my favorite podcaster, the Sports History Network store. Shop there today.
How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 2 of the Minnesota Sports History Show. I'm your host, Ryan Limbag, Vikings apologist for the Sports History Network. Today we will talk about the miracle at the Met, considered to be one of the Minnesota Vikings' most triumphant comebacks of all time, and ranked number 96 in the NFL's 100 greatest games. Luckily, this game is pretty well documented, and I was able to watch the comeback in its entirety. It's quite easy for me to relate to anxious Vikings fans of the early 80s. It was December 14, 1980, with the Vikings fighting for the division title and a playoff berth. They hosted the Cleveland Browns, who were having their best season since 1972. They would go on to finish the season 11-5 and win the AFC Central. It was a cold day in the open-air Metropolitan Stadium with a game-time temperature of a balmy 23 degrees Fahrenheit. Vikings quarterback Tommy Kramer would go on to set a then-franchise record of 456 passing yards in a single game, still good enough for the second most passing yards in a single game in franchise history. In fact, Tommy Kramer holds 3 of the top 5 game passing records of all time for the Vikings, including the most at 496 yards, a record from the 1986 season that stands to this day. A notable quarterback of the modern era holds the 4th most single-game passing yards of all time at 446 yards in the 2010 season, held by legendary Vikings quarterback Brett Favre. So, why did the 1980 Minnesota Vikings need a comeback, let alone a miracle? The 1980 Minnesota Vikings were a few years removed from their last Super Bowl appearance in 1977 and had middling success after their vaunted defensive line, known as the Purple People Eaters, retired, the group that dominated opposing offenses from the late 60s and into the 70s. The Detroit Lions and Minnesota Vikings jockeyed for first place in a relatively weak NFC Central division in the 1980 to 1981 season. Both the Lions and Vikings would finish 9-7, with the Vikings eking out a division title with a conference record tiebreaker. Going into the game, any combination of a Vikings win or Lions loss meant a division title for the Vikings, and the pressure was on. Cleveland had a win-and-get-in situation for the playoffs. With 5 minutes and 1 second left in the fourth quarter, the Cleveland Browns led the Vikings 23-15. After shutting out the Vikings in the first half, the Browns held on to an 8-point lead. It seemed like the perfect scenario to grind and run out the clock. Watching this game gives me goosebumps and makes my stomach hurt. As a lifelong Vikings fan, I fully understand how unlikely these kinds of comebacks are. Even though this game happened 5 years before I was even born, there's some kind of purple pride cosmic connection that transcends space and time. I can picture myself with a mullet and a jerry curl, sulking on a brown-toned floral printed sofa and threatening to turn off the TV as I simultaneously curse and pray for the Vikings. But down by 8 points, the Tommy Kramer-led Vikings would conduct an improbable comeback against a strong Cleveland team. After a squib kick, the Browns would begin their drive at their own 26-yard line. The odds seemed in their favor with time running out. Cleveland running back Mike Pruitt would rush for a couple first downs as the game clock approached 3 minutes. They kept it on the ground. Victory was imminent for the Browns. At their own 40, they would opt to pass as the game proceeded toward the 2-minute warning. This was a costly decision. Vikings cornerback Bobby Bryant intercepted Cleveland quarterback Brian Sipe, giving the Vikings a sliver of hope with great field position. It was a monumental error of a throw and a gift from the football gods, as the pass hit Bobby Bryant in the chest to give him his 50th career interception at the time. Still, the clock was ticking. Tommy Kramer orchestrated a beautiful drive where he completed 4 out of 5 passes, including a touchdown pass to Pro Bowl receiver Ahmad Rashad. More importantly, the Vikings took only 37 seconds off the clock on this scoring drive. After the extra point, the Vikings stared down a 1-point deficit, in part due to a missed extra point attempt by the Vikings earlier in the game. And time was on Cleveland's side. Side note, name a more iconic duo than the Minnesota Vikings and missed extra point kicks. You can't. The Vikings failed to convert an onside kick, and the Browns took over with about a minute and a half left in the game. A costly illegal motion penalty against the Browns and timeouts by the Vikings gave them the ever slightest amount of breathing room. The Browns were able to whittle the clock down to 23 seconds before electing to punt on 4th and short. Before the kick, the Browns called a timeout to contemplate the gamble of going for it. The Vikings took the field at their own 20 after a touchback, and only 14 seconds left in the game. Bud Grant would call for a hook and lateral play that was beautifully executed by Kramer, Sensor, and lateral to Ted Brown to gain 39 yards and get out of bounds with only 5 seconds left to play. After the razzle-dazzle trick play, NBC broadcaster Len Dawson remarked, "They're going to throw that ball up in the air and hope for a miracle." He was right. On the final play, and what would go down as the miracle at the Met, Kramer dropped back and heaved a Hail Mary into a crowd. Defensive back Tom Durden tipped it before Ahmad Rashad scooped in a one-handed catch and backed into the end zone with time expiring. You have to watch the film to see how gracefully Ahmad scored. The tipped ball bounced just the right way so that he could extend his arm, grab it, and step backwards into the end zone in one motion. He had to have nerves of steel at that moment. In Ahmad Rashad's words, "I see the defender jump up and tap it, and as I go by it, I just reach out and grab it, and then just kind of tip it in, there's a touchdown, and it was over." What was a sure Cleveland win disappeared in a moment. As a longtime Vikings fan, I cherish times when they were able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. 2-Minute Tommy earned his nickname, with 19 comeback victories. As of this recording, Tommy Kramer has yet to be added to the Vikings Ring of Honor, a sort of personal Hall of Fame for the franchise. In addition to his late-game heroics, he also has the second most passing yards of all time among Vikings quarterbacks. Current Vikings quarterback, Kirk Cousins, has piloted 13 comeback victories in his 5 years in Minnesota. Perhaps he can catch up to 2-Minute Tommy someday. Thanks for listening to the Minnesota Sports History Show on the Sports History Network. Skol. Have a blessed day, and join me next week to talk about Lindsay Whalen's local heroics, time away from Minnesota, and her triumphant return.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.